Hi everyone, I'm Bob from World 5 List, and from fleets of ships, tanks, and planes to full-on military bases, here are 6 amazing and mysterious abandoned machines. Number 6. The National Defense Reserve Fleet. I begin my list with an intentional abandoning, but one that's meant to serve a greater purpose. Now, it's not unknown that ships of the military eventually become obsolete, and thus they get decommissioned. It's a natural part of a ship's life cycle. However, if you pay attention around the United States, you're going to notice that there are a bunch of ships off the coast of the country that are actually abandoned, yet not broken down. This is because they're part of the National Defense Reserve Fleet. Now I know what you're asking. What the heck does that mean? Well, as it turns out, it's a fleet of ships that are meant to be activated if, and only if, the country is in crisis and their main battleships are inoperable or have been destroyed. Now, upon hearing this, you're likely thinking that this reserve fleet isn't really that large. After all, who would do such a thing in large numbers? But in fact, the reserve fleet is actually thousands of ships strong. Ships from many different eras are out there in the waters and on both coasts. In fact, the United States, well, they're not actually trying to hide them. They have them in full view of the world. A great example of this is Suisun Bay in California. The area that's close to San Francisco holds one of the largest parts of the reserve fleet, a ship that fought in both World War II and in the Korean War. Though this idea is interesting and clearly a lot of care has been put into it, time's not really been kind to the ships. While a majority could technically be made seaworthy, every year that passes adds more age to the hull. Many have rusted out and have sank to the oceans where they used to stand, and the cost of rebuilding some of them would be in the billions. Even more amazing is that there isn't a whole lot of security. There have been documented cases of people simply paddling up to the boats and exploring them, taking pictures and having interesting stories to tell to their families. In the end, the National Defense Reserve Fleet could be activated one day, but the question is, well and truly, will any of them become capable of sustaining battle when they do? Some will and some won't, depending on their age, and others can if they're rebuilt, but until that point, they simply sit abandoned. Number 5. The ex-Soviet submarine base. But be sure to subscribe if you're new here and check out our other videos. I'd love to bring you more great content in the future. Cast your minds back to the Cold War, a time where 2 of the most powerful countries in the world, the United States and the USSR, were waging a secret war, one that many felt would end with the world literally being blown up via nuclear missiles. In this time of war and secrecy, it was vital that every military base that could be hidden was hidden. And for the Soviet Union, one of the most well-kept secrets was a base that is now fully visible but abandoned. Allow me to introduce you to the Balaclava submarine base. You often hear about secret bases, but this one truly lives up to the hype. It was meant to be a secret launch point of various submarines, as well as a dock, a repair station, and a full-on base in and of itself. It would be discovered by most of the world when the Russians abandoned the base after the Cold War. It was built to last, as it was made to withstand a nuclear bomb. And adding to the legend and importance of the base, it also had within its walls a couple of ballistic missiles. Thankfully, they were unused, but if things had gone a different way, it could have ended up another story entirely. As for what happened to the base, it's simply a case of there not being a need anymore. The Soviet Union crumbled, the Cold War ended, and in 1993, everything was shut down. Then, in 2000, the base would be given to the Ukraine. Now, it's a mere memory of what the Cold War was like, the need to have such bases these days, to have the strategic advantage should something be done, and the lengths that countries would go to, both conceal and protect themselves from their enemies' eyes. The base has been looted, stripped of all its valuables, and was actually turned into a museum. Number 4. DAVIS-MONTHAN Air Force Base. Now, I've already shown you one of the ways that military craft are disposed of after their expiration date, but what about airplanes? Well, planes and jets and other flying things are a more valuable part of the military complex. So what happens when they're rendered flightless? They go to a place like DAVIS-MONTHAN Air Force Base in Tucson, Arizona. It may not look like a whole lot from the sky, but as you get closer, you're going to see just how big this airplane graveyard truly is. If you were to try and count all of the aircraft within the base, you'd get a number that ranges at about 4,000, maybe even more. Now, a question you may be asking yourself is, why do they put them in the desert? Well, it's twofold, really. Number one, they need to keep them safe from both people and the elements, and the desert also makes a place that people would have trouble stealing from without getting caught. Just as important, the dryness ensures that rain, snow, and other causes of wear, tear, and rust are minimized. True, the sun and air do help, but it's at a much slower rate with planes like these. Another reason that such aircraft are abandoned and stored like this is that they still have uses as scrap, meaning that if the military needs a part and doesn't want to rebuild one from scratch, there's a chance that one of these babies will hold the part they need. Aircraft parts are actually a very lucrative business, as shown in shows like Mythbusters have proven over the years. Make no mistake about it, though, the DAVIS-MONTHAN Air Force Base isn't just for the lower-tier military craft. Each one of these planes could cost millions to make, including some legendary fighters, like the F-14 or the venerable B-52 bomber. Price-wise, I'm talking hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe even $1 billion, and it's all abandoned, just waiting to be made useful again. Number 3. JOHNSTON Atoll. To get what we need, the people of the world have done some incredible things and built many more incredible things. But you may be surprised to learn that the United States once even built a secret island, and now it's abandoned. It's named JOHNSTON Atoll, and it's much more than you may expect. Location-wise, the island's basically in the middle of the ocean, 750 miles away from Hawaii, and at one point it was just a little blip, nothing to really write home about. But then the United States came and decided to truly make something out of it. In fact, by the time it was complete, the entire island was many times bigger than how it originally began, and now it's almost entirely artificial. So what did the United States have in store for the island? That's a secret. The island may be exposed to the world now, but at one time it was known as the Area 51 of the ocean. It was clear that they did have various intentions. After all, they used it for decades before decommissioning it in 2004. The logistics of the base alone would be a nightmare, having to constantly ship out supplies in order to continue building or expand, or even do testing or whatever it was they were doing there. Regardless of the intent, the base is now abandoned and an artificial island sits in the middle of the ocean. Number 2. A tank graveyard. Now, when it comes to countries and their militaries, you would think there'd be special priority in terms of making sure that all military craft are kept under lock and key, away and secure from potential enemies. After all, if something is just left around, it could be used against you. However, when it comes to the Russians, that's not the case. They've been known to abandon their tanks, and by abandon, I mean leave large amounts of them just lying around. This has happened multiple times. One of the most notable was when the Soviet Union was in charge and they had their war with Afghanistan. They were then forced to retreat and hastily left behind a large brigade of tanks outside of Kabul airport. Fully functioning tanks, I should tell you, all abandoned and all free for use or even for scrap. Many people felt it was a foolish move on the part of the Russians, but as they would eventually find out, it wasn't a move they made lightly, and they actually did it happily. In 2010, the Russian military left 400 tanks unguarded near a forest, and all of these tanks were functional. So when the locals found out, they then went and did some exploring and had some fun. Russia has denied the careless abandoning of their tanks, but being as there are pictures of Russian citizens on them, I tend to believe them even more. Number 1. Missile silos. During the earliest days of missile warfare, countries would contain their massive missiles in just as massive silos. These silos were built not just to last, but also to survive any kind of attack. The Titan silos, for example, were an underground complex meant to shield and protect, as well as house all of the people needed to operate the systems to fire the missiles they carried. In terms of costs, the Titan silos were made for about $170 million apiece, and were quite the engineering feat of the day. However, technology often advances, and as time went on, portable silos and missile launchers were created, and all of these very costly silos were made obsolete and then abandoned. In fact, you could say they were stone cold abandoned, as they were simply shut down and left to the will of the elements. Because no one was there to maintain them, many of them collapsed, others flooded, and the few that did remain were later auctioned off to the highest bidder on eBay. So it certainly makes you wonder, doesn't it? All of that effort, all of that work, and then you simply close it down and sell it off to someone who's likely going to use it for personal gain. Thanks for watching. What did you think of these abandoned machines? Let me know all about it in the comments below. Be sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you next time on World 5.